All right, so you met Chandler through his crashing the car on Salt Flats, is that right?
That is right. That was my intro to bushwhacking.
Man, and that's a great example. I mean, obviously, Chandler knows what he's doing.
He does.
So I guess he got the FJ out of it.
Yeah, exactly.
But we hate that car still, too. So, well, Nimit Patel, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
It's good to have you here, man. I mean, we've been communicating for a long time. And, I forget exactly how long ago it was now, but we only met, like, in person. What, like, a month and a half? It was recent.
Yep.
But we've literally been talking for quite a long time.
Yeah.
Honestly, it may be even one of the longest contacts on Instagram that I have been talking to. And we would chat about, photography, anything really.
Everything.
It was good. I mean, we talked about like working in finance and everything and like money stuff. But it's good to have you on the show finally and really bring you into part of our family. You get your hat now.
Yeah, exactly. I'm excited. I'm wearing this all
official.
the time.
You're official. But I think we'd like to start the episode here, just like we do every episode. Who is Nimit Patel?
Sure, yeah. Before I go to that, I just want to say thank you to you and Chandler.
Absolutely.
It's interesting because if, like, for example, if you had asked me to be on a podcast like 2-3 years ago, there's probably not even a chance I would have considered it because it's just so outside of my comfort zone and all. So I appreciate you guys, just both of you guys being, that's how you're building this community, that you're just so inclusive and make people feel comfortable. So I appreciate you guys. And thanks for having me on in the first place. So,
yeah, absolutely, man. We're happy to have you here. And, it's fun. You do stuff like this with our people. And, it kind of becomes a less scary thing to do this when you're friends.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like I mean, you had texted me like, "Oh man, I don't know how I'm going to be." I'm like, "Dude, we're just going to chat." Like it's not like a serious, highly produced thing where you have to say everything right. I make a mistake. Chandler makes tons of mistakes when he talks. But like you make a mistake, who cares? We just move on and keep going. So but anyway, back to the question.
Yeah,
sounds
good.
Who is Nimit Patel?
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in New York City. My parents moved to New York in the 80s from India. And my brother and me were born there. So I spent my childhood there. I went to nursing school there. I worked there for 4 years in a hospital there. Along the way, in 2015, is when I actually decided I wanted to get serious about photography. So that's actually when I bought my first professional camera. So I was continuing to work as a nurse in the hospital. And then a little bit over time, like I started doing photo shoots with couples, eventually some weddings and other paid work. But I was always doing it alongside nursing. I never made it like a serious commitment to it until pretty recently, actually, which I'm sure we're going to discuss that. And then about in 2018, after my wedding, my wife and I decided to be a travel healthcare professionals. So that's actually what, in the last 4 years, that has taken us all around the country. We actually started so we got married. We moved down to Florida for about a year. We worked down there. We had some family there. So it was easier having people that we knew, in the community. And then eventually that brought us to the West Coast. And we've been, I think the last 2 years, we spent a lot of time in California, Oregon, Washington, before last year arriving here in Utah. So that's kind of, the background of the really last 8-9 years of what our career has taken us, all over. And it was supposed to be temporary. And some of this a lot more than other people that I've discussed with. But it was supposed to be temporary. We were only supposed to be here for the summer last year. And my wife and I just adored this region, like all around. And that's actually when I started, meeting you guys and interacting with your work, and and that kind of brings us to today. So
yeah, that's sweet.
Yeah.
Before we get into like a lot of the stuff today and what we're gonna talk about with photos and everything, let's stay back in the beginning.
Yeah.
So New York, that is a completely different place than at least here in Utah and much of the West.
Yeah.
I mean, you get big cities like LA, San Fran, and that
right.
They are comparable, but even Salt Lake City. It's not even close to New York.
Right.
So what are some of the biggest differences that you can remember about living in New York compared to living here?
That's a good question. I think not just Utah, but other places I've lived, like in Oregon in particular, I would say Oregon, is growing up, it was kind of melting pot, right? Diverse people, diverse cultures, everything, everyone is there. And it was a tremendous part of my childhood because, like, growing up, I was exposed to all those cultures and friends of all backgrounds, and learn all kinds of things. And I think that was something different for us depending on like where we ended up for those contracts the last few years, as I was discussing. So that's been something really different. And something I love about the name of Salt Lake City is that it says city in the name, but I mean, compared to, again, for a New Yorker,
it's different.
It's just tremendously different, you know. But that's actually one of the reasons we love it here. We like that open area, fresh air, not congested. Like, that's what I'm used to, but that's one of the things we like about it here. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know off the top of my head how many people live here in Salt Lake or how many people live in New York City, but I mean, it's not even close.
No.
And especially because I've been in New York at least, I think, twice or 3 times in my life. I can't remember. But, I mean, New York City is just insanely busy.
Yeah.
I mean, it's packed.
Oh, yeah.
And it does not feel like that at all here.
Right.
And it's still it's the biggest city in Utah, obviously.
Absolutely.
But, like, it does not feel like a big city by any means.
Yeah.
And I think it's really cool because you get a little bit, like you're saying, of some of the city kind of lifestyle.
Oh, yeah.
But because of the size and the location of Salt Lake in the West, and especially here in Utah, you got mountains right next to the city too, which you don't get in New York City.
No. Yeah. And that's something that my wife and I in particular, like just opening our window, going out into our backyard and seeing snow-covered mountains in the winter for us. And I don't think we'll ever actually get over that. But we didn't grow up around that, and pretty much until college, I was not even going to see those types of places elsewhere. So I didn't really enjoy them until I was like well into my probably like 22, 23 years old. And then like going back to your question about like the differences growing up in New York City and then living here, another thing is like, how they say it's a city that never sleeps. So it makes me think back to back in college, what I would do is I went to school like 3 hours upstate, from Queens, New York, where I lived. So I would take the bus, go up, take the bus. It was like $30, $40, all other college students coming home, going back from like, Christmas vacation, all that stuff. So I remember being in, like Port Authority, like 3 a.m. or 3:30 in the morning in New York City. And they're not kidding when they say the city that never sleeps. Like, lights everywhere, people everywhere. I was like, I recall being in a McDonald's, just waiting for the bus to come in. There's like, it looks like it's like lunchtime.
Yeah. I mean, it's totally different than here.
Yeah.
I mean, like you come down to Utah or other places in this region and you have some of the darkest skies you will ever see. Yeah. And I mean, there's no way you'd ever see the Milky Way anywhere close to New York City.
And I didn't.
Yeah. Like you have to really get away from that city, the busy life, in order to see stuff like that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And like, not that like when I grew up, we had, skies like that because I grew up outside of Chicago.
Right.
But I mean, we saw a handful of stars. Yeah. I mean, I'm assuming New York is probably the same way, maybe even less because it's a bigger city.
Yeah.
But like, you can't see any of that.
No.
I mean, like when you were growing up, were you ever inclined towards the outdoors in the way that you might be now?
It's funny when you ask that question, like physically. So, for example, like as a teenager, even early college, like if I heard like friends were going camping or doing like hikes and stuff, I never recall like actually being like, oh, like I want to do that. But it's not because I didn't like the outdoors. It's hard to explain because I feel like typically when people are kind of have the personality I do, which is kind of I do spend a lot of time in my own head and I'm like write things down and of that nature, thinker, right? So often those people do like the outdoors. They like the solitude of the outdoors and those things, but I didn't actually embrace those things until, like I said, like college or what have you. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think having been in places like this now or elsewhere, especially in the West, do you think you could go back to living in a place like New York City?
That's a good question too. I don't think so. And specifically in my case, the only reason I returned to New York City is to spend time with my family. So my parents still live in New York, as well as many of my other close relatives. If it wasn't for that, I probably would, I don't even know how the frequency of how I'd go back. So I often during our travels, whatever, like whether it's in Florida or, on the West Coast in California, often on my jobs, my coworkers would ask like, what brought you here? Or why did you leave New York? Like a lot of people are
that's a place
want to live there.
Yeah.
Like literally people from other countries want to go and move to New York City or LA, what have you. And I was like, growing up in the city, I realized I didn't like to live in the city.
Yeah.
So
there's definitely a difference in lifestyle.
Right.
I mean, I grew up in the suburbs, obviously not like downtown, but
yeah.
And it's not rural necessarily, but you live downtown and you can just feel it. There's a difference.
Oh yeah,
like
sure.
moving through those streets, and it's not for everyone. And especially, I think, like in your case, you come out to a place like this and you see everything else
it's heaven.
that there is to offer out here.
Oh,
It's like, why would you not want to spend more time in a place like this?
Yeah.
So you got out here, out west, through your journey in medicine.
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit about that.
Sure.
So you say you went to school in New York City?
Yeah, SUNY Binghamton. So it's pretty near Syracuse, New York.
Okay.
Yeah.
And did you start out nursing there, or was your first contract elsewhere?
In terms of when I first started travel nursing.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
my first travel nursing contract was in Florida, in Tampa.
Gotcha. So you got to choose the location, right? Because that's how the travel nursing scenario works.
Yeah.
What drew you to Tampa?
Oh, good question. Yeah. So we have the way that they place us for those positions is really cool because they staff nationwide. So we can kind of give them a rough area, of, hey, I want to be in San Diego or in a city in Florida, you know, like a broader region. So we had family already in the Tampa area. And as anyone who, for example, you've moved from Chicago, and I don't know if you lived elsewhere before moving here, but anyone that's done a long distance move know that it's not an easy thing. It's something that's very easy to talk about. Many times people will say, I want to move here or I want to do this. But when you actually put these things into action and do these things, there's nothing easy about it. There's nothing cheap about it. There's nothing easy about it, moving, right? So initially, both of us were very apprehensive about that part, leaving our families because we're very close to them and kind of missing out on that proximity, being able to spend time with them literally every week, or whatever. So that's why we chose Florida, because we had a lot of relatives living there, and we're like, hey, it'll help us ease into this, kind of new journey and being away from home.
Gotcha. So a few quick questions. You were moving with your wife?
Yes.
Correct. And how old were you at the time?
I don't remember my age, but it was 2018. So,
okay, gotcha. So not too long ago.
No, 4 years ago.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And how did you like your time in Tampa?
Oh, it was really good. Yeah. And I've liked things about everywhere we've been, but Tampa, in terms of the city itself, it was really nice. Downtown, like they had a beautiful river walk down there, like similar to like the one that Chicago has. Fantastic beaches. If you're familiar with the area, there's another city called St. Petersburg, not far from there, which is absolutely beautiful as well. It kind of fits every, what people think of Florida, like palm trees and beautiful beaches and sunshine. I just love the laid back culture down there, and also the weather, which was awesome. So that was actually the first time we lived somewhere that didn't have like winter.
Right.
So like growing up in New York, and of course you in Chicago, but I was used to snow and all that kind of stuff, everything that comes along with it. So it was nice. I just spent the whole year in tank top and shorts. I mean, it didn't matter what month it was. So.
Must have been nice. Yeah, must have been nice. So this profession that brought you to Tampa, the travel nursing, how did you get into that?
Good question. So part of that is actually, it kind of goes back to where my Instagram handle has come from, actually. It's kind of interesting. It's probably a good time to introduce why that's even that way. So growing up, my dad is a physician. My brother's also a physician. My family has a whole slew of doctors that work in medical. So growing up, even into, I want to say about sophomore year of college, up until that point, I was actually on that track myself. So I was pre-med. I was taking all, whatever courses are related to that, preparing for that. But every time it actually came up in a conversation, why are you doing this? Or like, do you really want to do it? It was like kind of like nothing. Like nothing came from that discussion. Like I never felt passionate about it. I never actually felt like it was the right path for me. But I was also, and I'm still relatively, I would say, but I was very practical too. So I didn't want to switch to something completely different and take a big risk where I'm not sure where I'm going to end up after college. So after a lot of research and thinking, I ended up on nursing. And the reason for that was actually that I discovered that you could be a traveling nurse. So that was actually one of the big reasons I even went to nursing school. I planned to get experience and then use that to allow me to move around the country and work in all different states and hospitals, and and that's what kind of brought me there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What did you like most about that job in particular? Because I know you're kind of transitioning out of that in
Right.
a way.
Yes.
But what about that did you like while you were doing that for what it was like 4 years
Yeah,
or
about
so
4
now?
years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what was the best part about that job besides the travel?
Oh yeah, sure. So before I started travel nursing, certainly the profession itself was rewarding. That came with its challenges, absolutely. But with the traveling, what was so awesome about it was literally I could fly to another state, work full time, and on my days off, I had this whole playground that I've never been to. For example, when we moved to San Jose, San Francisco, what happened is usually nurses that work in the hospitals, typically they do 3 12-hour shifts a week, and that's their full-time schedule. So that means you have 3 to 4 days a week to, if you're not picking up extra shifts, to go explore the area. So I think that's what we loved the most about it, was that yes, we were working full-time, but we were allowed to had that ability to enjoy on our days off like a new area.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's pretty sweet. I mean, it's having multiple days off like that.
Yeah.
Would be a phenomenal benefit.
Right.
I mean, everyone for the most part gets Saturday, Sunday.
Yeah,
but,
of course.
But if you can have 3 or 4 day weekends,
Yeah.
every single week, that would be pretty
Yeah.
cool. I mean, I can only imagine what I would do if I had that time every week. It'd be fun. So you came from Tampa to where after that?
We moved to California, San Jose.
San Jose.
Yeah.
And how did San Jose on the West Coast compare to the East Coast?
So again, some overlap, but lots of differences too that we noticed. What I love about California, I still do believe that in terms of the landscape and diversity of the landscape, I think California has and it's a very large state certainly, but it really has it all. We absolutely loved our time there. Everything on the coast from inland, so Lake Tahoe, all the national parks. It's just tremendously exciting to explore those areas. Yeah.
Yeah. With all the places that you've been to,
Mm-hmm.
you've certainly seen some really cool things. But if you had to move again, where would you want to move to?
That's a good question, and I know the answer to, because before deciding to move here, that's something that my wife's name is Shreya, that we would constantly talk about. And it's funny that you asked that question, because even after we moved, so it's been about a year since we bought the house. We've been here longer than that, but we moved in January. And it still came up, maybe a couple of months after moving in, hey, did we do the right thing? Or if you could, would you decide to move somewhere else? And every time we both end up on no, that it would be right here. And again, a lot of it goes back to both of our life experiences before that, and the places we've already lived and what we've seen and stuff. Because as you noticed too, or hear people say, there's also tons of people that want to leave Utah. So, but I've seen that everywhere. So, for example, in New York, I've heard people say, I don't want to live here anymore. California, I don't want to live here anymore. I think a lot of that is just personal. Preferences are very different in terms of those things. And something that really comes to mind is, for example, Utah is still a good example, but California. So California, there's tons of people who lived in California all their lives and haven't been to one national park.
Right.
Because that's just not their lifestyle or what they prefer to do with their time, So I think all of those things come into play and, kind of influence where you feel right at home. So
yeah. And Salt Lake, for a lot of people, and certainly like us, it definitely feels like home.
Yeah.
To a very real degree.
Right.
So you were trying to transition out of the nursing field
Yes.
now
Yes.
and dive more into photography.
Yes.
What sparked that change in you?
Sure. Yeah. And again, that's a great question, and something I'm very actively for the last 3-4 months, I want to say, kind of working on that transition. So the spark that you're talking about, actually, it's been there since I started working as a nurse. So I mentioned about how I never felt like it was the right fit for me to go to medical school. But if what we were just discussing, I was never like, it was not a pre-planned thing to go to nursing school either. So before I switched into nursing, I actually looked into a few different things like graphic design and things, because I've always loved working on those types of things. Like I used to make simple websites, do graphic design just for myself personally, make simple websites for like friends for projects they're working on. So I actually considered switching into that. But what brought me into nursing was like, the practicality of it was that, hey, after school, I know that there's something I can count on and, be secure. Now, going further from that, so fast forward to finishing nursing school and then actually starting, I didn't know what I was signing up for in a lot of different ways. I mean that, like what I did day to day on a shift, all the responsibilities that I would have on a shift. As I mentioned, I was exposed to what like a doctor does quite a bit growing up. I saw what my dad did and then eventually my brother. So I knew kind of those things, but I didn't realize how stressful and how bad for my mental health it would be, honestly. And fast forward again. So let's say 2 years, 3 years into my career, I had already started thinking about how I'm going to escape, like from that career. And again, I'm grateful for what it's provided for my family. I'm grateful for everything I've learned. It's been, as a lot of people discuss, like it's the challenges that are the things that actually help you grow in life. So I have learned so much and seen so much in the hospital where I work that it kind of set me up for being able to handle kind of everything that's thrown at me later, if that makes sense.
Right.
But going back to the spark, so I already had known that, hey, like eventually I'm going to want to do something else. Like this is not what I feel like I'm being compelled to do. Until 2015, which I mentioned at the beginning, like I didn't actually consider photography as that. But actually how I started photography was I don't even think it wasn't our camera. I feel like just at any family event, like I was actually the youngest. So they would kind of just hand it off to me, like kind of pawn off that responsibility. But what I started to notice is people would come back and like look at, like after the event, they would look at the photos and they're like, you have a good eye for that, or like you're good at this. And I didn't really hear a lot of that growing up. My parents were super like supportive in general, so it's nothing like that. But like something specific about a skill like that, right, like that I was good at, I didn't really hear a lot of that. But that goes back to probably just not doing much. Like I said, I did not spend time outdoors. I was spending hours playing video games all day and stuff like that, right? So I heard it enough that I was like, hey, maybe this is something that I should look into further. And then I started to, research further and like got my own camera and started doing paid, shoots and stuff. And then it kind of just snowballed from there. And now going back to the previous question that you were asking about travel nursing, the interesting thing about that is like, if this was, let's say, for example, I never actually travel nurse and I stayed back home in New York, I was already like shooting weddings. I was doing engagement photos, all of that. But on the travel nursing journey, with everything positive about it, there were some big negatives. So like, for example, one negative was that, okay, we ended up in San Jose, California that we were discussing, right? But we're only there for 3 months. So we don't know anybody. I'm working a full-time job with an irregular schedule, right? Nurse's job. So what problem that posed was, even if I tried to get the word out to like the local community that, I'm doing this type of work, nobody knew me. And in 3 months, it's tough to be working full time and focus on those endeavors. So something that's been amazing about finally finding where we feel at home here in Utah and having time is to really focus on that, career. So like the last 3-4 months, I mean, I did my last travel job in Portland, Oregon. That was in July. Ever since then, I've been working pretty with, like committed, focus to photography. So, I mean, I'm sure we're going to talk more about that, but it's given me the time to focus on that, if you will, like, working for the last 7-8 years as a nurse, having built up, a little nest egg so that I can focus on these things that actually, mean something to me. So,
yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
And there's definitely a real thing of what you just mentioned about not having the time, or like being so new to a place and not being able to really build some kind of client base or a following in a new home, that you're only there for 3 months. Like, that's hard unless you already had a following to begin with, and,
right,
and your work is known
right,
nationally. Like, but for most of us, we don't have that ability. And especially if you're doing things like portraits and weddings, like a lot of your work comes from word of mouth.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so
absolutely.
you get to a new place, and it's like suddenly you know no one. There is no word of mouth. There's no spreading of your work.
Right.
And so you have to start all over again.
Yeah.
But it's good to hear that you think you finally found a place where you want to maybe settle down and, start that up, which would be cool. I want to go back to something you said in that where you mentioned you didn't really have like the passion for nursing.
Right.
And it made it tough to deal with a lot of the negatives of it because I experienced that a little bit myself as well going through my coaching career.
Right.
I knew, 3 or 4 years before that while I enjoyed volleyball and it was my life, there was something about it that I'm like, I don't think this is it for me.
Right.
And I never really could get past that and actually move on. But I knew there was something. Right. And that made it at the end. I was like, I can't take this anymore. Like, I got to be done. And so I got out of it. But it's the same thing with you. But when you find that new thing that you found in photography, same way with me, you can go through anything with it. Yeah. And it really speaks. It's like, it's not so much, what it is you're trying to do, but it's finding your why. Right. And finding the thing you're passionate in. Yeah. I know that there's a famous quote from Viktor Frankl in his Man's Search for Meaning. It's
fantastic book.
Yeah, fantastic book. It's definitely one that people should go pick up. But it's, people can survive anything if they have a why.
100%.
And it sounds like it's kind of what you went through too. Yeah. It's like, if you're not really into something like nursing, it's going to be hard to stick that out through thick and thin. Right. But if hopefully this photography thing works out for you, sky's the limit. Yeah, which is awesome. So let's talk about what you're doing now. Sure. So I know you had recently signed a deal with a company. I can't remember the name of it.
Oh yeah, I think you're referring to Helminor.
Yes. Yes. So let's talk about Helminor. Sure. So what are you doing for them, and what does that job or contract look like?
Yeah, awesome. So before I even go in specifically about Helminor, it's really interesting because again, it relates to everything we're talking about, like how you plan for things in life. But it's important to plan, but it rarely actually turns out how you expect to, and that's kind of like how Bushwhackers started, which we were discussing before. So Helminor is a art gallery based in Laguna Beach. The founder, his name is actually Brent Blossom. So I've been selling my photos. I would say when I actually first listed my photos for sale, maybe like 2 years ago. I actually opened like an Etsy shop and listed some stuff, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna, I didn't actually expect it to go that way, but like, how it worked, like, I'll post to them and I'm gonna retire from this, I'm gonna quit. Obviously that did not work, and there's things I've learned along the way that now I understand why it didn't happen that way. But anyway, so now coming back to like how I, just finished my last job in July and decided to get really, serious about it. So I kind of went through it all again. So I relisted photos, all the specifics about it, how I'm going to fulfill orders and all this kind of stuff that goes along with it. Now, during the course of that, I decided to make an Instagram specifically for my shop. So that way, kind of when somebody comes there, they can quickly see that, like what the goal is, that this is just photography, it's art that you can buy, and so it's straight to the point, versus like someone, which I see often is the case, like, when you go to like someone's personal page, it's not always apparent that they even sell their photos, and a lot of times people are not going to click on links and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, this the shop Helminor, what happened was I was actually, as I started posting on my shop profile, somehow, with the algorithm or whatever, I started to interact with more companies. There are, other companies that started like 4 or 5 years ago that are lifestyle decor, art companies like that. Helminor was one of the ones that came up. I don't remember if I saw like an advertisement or something, but I followed them in hopes that actually, like, down the line, maybe they want to do a partnership or something. So I reached out to Brent one day, and what's funny is he responded right away. He was like, oh yeah, like, you have excellent, work and stuff. But he was confused also about like what that page was. He thought that I was actually like an art sales company because of the quality of the photos, and he really liked them. So he thought that I actually had like agreements with photographers that I was selling their photos for them. And I was like, no, like, this is all my work, because I had to make it clear that this is my work. I'm not selling other people's, work. So it kind of just, went from there, but we discussed more. He worked in creative and marketing for at least 10 years actually himself. So it's very interesting that you can actually go on the Helminor website and read their story to get a little bit more insight on this. But he started the company after years and years of developing other people's brands, other people's companies, and he finally decided that he wanted to do something himself, for himself, for his family. And it kind of just matched what a lot of us are hoping to do, eventually at some point. And then he thought my work was, good enough to feature on his website. There's about, I think, like 9 or 10 photographers right now. It was very meaningful to hear from someone who works in creative, who has experience in that industry, and him seeing that there was something in my work that, kind of matched his mission with the company. And like, that's kind of very new, like as you just mentioned. So like, I think my collection just went live there like 3 weeks ago or something. And he is tremendously passionate about his company, advertising and everything right now. We made some sales, and I'm actually probably going to be working closer with him on his team. So I don't know exactly how that looks, but it could, mean that I'm going out to California more again, which I'm never opposed to go to California, So kind of seeing where it goes. But it's certainly going back to what we were discussing before, like, everything we planned, it's not something I ever expected to be doing, though. Like, I expected to, because I've shot some weddings, right? So I was like, oh, I'm going to be a wedding photographer, like shoot weddings. And now it's like, I do it, and I do enjoy elopements. It's a little bit different, but I don't even think about that, though, because like I'm more passionate about this aspect of it, and I didn't plan that, though. Like, it was never my intention to end up here. So it's very exciting.
Yeah, and you got to remind me, how long have you been shooting?
So I would say about 2015, and that's when I got my Sony A7 II.
Gotcha. So 7 years or so.
Yeah.
Is this obviously, besides the work you've done with portraits, weddings, and all that, is this the first kind of big contract work you've gotten?
Oh, absolutely, 100%. Yeah. And I think that go ahead.
I was gonna say, what does like the validation from someone else like that mean to you?
Oh man, that's hard to put into words. Very hard to put into words, because I think it's just my personality that not to say that I need that, but getting that from people I respect, like you, Chandler, what have you, like getting that respect, it makes me want to be better, to improve, to keep going, versus not getting that, if that makes sense. So it's not like what I derive my value from, but getting that validation from people I respect helps me evolve and keep improving.
Yeah, it helps shape your path.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about improving a little bit. What have you found most helpful to you in terms of getting better at this craft?
Oh, man. I think surrounding myself with other people who are better at what I'm trying to do is the easiest way in any industry field, is to be the dumbest person in the room, to be the person who's not the most talented. And if you surround yourself with people like that, it's kind of like a natural, they're gonna rub off on you, and you're just gonna improve, kind of because you have to,
right?
To kind of keep up,
Yeah, the only way is up from there.
Yeah,
and that's a great thing. Now, when you were first learning, what was that process like for you in terms of figuring out how to use a camera, to a better degree and taking better photos?
Sure. To this day, I have not taken a photography class or a course. Okay, as lots of photographers, right, these days, have not. But I still have not taken a course or anything yet. I plan to kind of, hone the craft more along the way. But I went on YouTube. I went on online resources, a lot of websites that had tutorials and information. Specifically, when I first started shooting paid work, is actually when I first started learning about manual mode, the exposure triangle, everything. And what was so funny for me is, like, actually in college, like, I did fine. Obviously, I got good grades. I made it through and everything. But I never recall being in a class and being, like, so, listening so intently to what was being taught, because I just wasn't there. Like, I was somewhere else, even though I was physically there. But then with all this stuff, I was like, oh, that makes sense. Like, oh, aperture. And it's like, how open this, and then how it changes, like depending on what the shutter speed is, if you want to capture motion, if you want to, whatever, all these things. It was very exciting to learn. And it was actually the only thing that I had like researched and learned independently outside of school, whatever, my assignments were and stuff. So it was all from YouTube pretty much. Yeah. Tremendous resources.
Yeah. And I think that's really a testament to like what it's like today, and the fact that you don't have to go to like organized school or classes
absolutely,
in order to learn and get better at a lot of stuff like
absolutely.
what we do.
Yeah.
There are definitely a lot of things like, I have a math degree, and go to school for that.
Right.
Don't try to do that on your own. But for a lot of the creative stuff, like photography, video stuff, graphics, I mean, you can pick it up on your own. I mean, I was the same way. I feel like most everyone we know is that way too. Yeah. And it's like, you just have to dive into something. Right. But it really is like, it's funny how that changes when you find something that you love to do.
Absolutely.
And that's the biggest difference of all of it. So with this new craft, obviously you have this work you're doing now with Helm & Orr, but where do you want to go? Like, what is it that you want to accomplish in this space?
Yeah. And again, that's a good question. And it's not something I've have like a solid plan for, because again, I recall actually, and I'm going to bring him up because he's been instrumental in my development in general. He's a very good friend of mine. But like in general, like really, besides my parents, my brother is my best friend. His name is Sumit. He's a doctor. He's an ER doctor in Florida. But we are absolutely like close. He's my best friend. I've leaned on him heavily. He's only a year older than me, but through the years, basically everything has been easy for me because I've just seen what he did and then like just kind of copied him and emulated what he's doing in life. And you can't steer wrong when you're following someone's footsteps that's succeeding and kind of has the life you want. So in addition to my brother, one other good friend of mine, his name is Bharat. He actually works, it's kind of like different because like I'm a nurse. So it's kind of clear like what my role is at work and stuff. But he works in like non-healthcare. He's worked in a lot of technology, IT stuff. So over the last few years, he's been like my only contact who works in like a field that's really different from mine that I could ask questions about and like gain insight into another industry. And I had a phone call with Bharat. I want to say I had just gone to Scotland and Ireland, and I just came back, and we had I remember texting him. I was like, this because he knows about the travel nursing and he knows how I feel about wanting to change. He's heard me say that I want to do more photography for years, actually. So I was like, I'm really serious this time. Like, I need help. I have some questions, and I feel like you could help me. And he's really good about, okay, so we had the scheduled call. We're talking on the phone. He's really good about kind of like what you're doing in podcasts and asking people questions is instead of like offering what he thinks he would do or like tell you what to do, he is awesome at asking the right questions that just dig deeper and deeper into like what I'm actually saying to him, right? He's very good at getting into the nitty-gritty of it. So out of that phone call, really what I understood from that phone call, he was like, it sounds to me like you need to commit. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, I'm serious about it. Like, I've improved my skills over the years. Like, like I'm serious about this. He was like, are you serious? Like, like without saying those words, like, are you serious? Like, did you commit to this decision that you want to grow your photography business? And I was like, in my head, again, a lot of this was unsaid, but he did ask, like, I think it sounds like you need to commit. And for me, that was like the perfect timing to hear that because I had just finished that contract. I did not, and I do not want to go on another contract. So here, one of my good friends is like basically calling me out and saying like, you're not committed, and that's the only issue. So after that day, basically like every day I woke up from that point has been a little different in terms of, for example, like the day before. And again, that's another thing about when you're in complete control of your schedule, what have you. So like as a nurse, I was not, I had a shift schedule and I followed it, whatever. On my days off, I could do whatever I wanted, but often I didn't have the energy to do so. So now imagine you have 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, open, free. To a lot of people, that sounds like what they want. But once you have that, it's not easy to kind of provide a structure for yourself. And that's kind of the stuff that I discussed with Bharat. And I realized quickly that I had no structure. I had no, like I wasn't actually, doing those actions that are going to help me, progress further. So basically, since that conversation, I made a lot of changes. Like I would write down things that I was going to do for my photography business, which is versus like just, it would be nice to do this, or, one day I'll do this. So that's been very helpful. And that's kind of how we ended up here, like with this partnership with Helminor and all this stuff. But it's changed. Like even in the last 3 months, I thought that I was going to be more focused on shooting weddings, for example. But again, that's not something that's a priority to me anymore. It's all these other things about photography as an art form that are actually inspiring me. So if that, I feel like that gives enough background to your question.
Yeah. So I got another question here for you.
Yeah.
I think you're going to like this one. Let's say you've committed to photography now, which you have.
Right.
You said you were following like your brother's example,
right,
for the most part.
Yeah.
And it's great to follow people who excel at things,
right,
are good role models. Like you need that in your life. But how are you going to separate yourself?
Just in the industry, right. And that is a great question. For example, working as a nurse for the last 8 years, yes, even in the workplace in the hospital, like there are top performers. There are people who are very knowledgeable and do well. But it's a little bit like I could just do my job and that was like enough, like take care of my patients, be authentic, and which is easy for me. I love that aspect of my job, but it didn't require constant evolution and like leveling up my skills, if you will. So with this photography, something that has been difficult and challenging in the last, I would say like 2-3 years, when I started shooting more landscape specifically, is like, I remember like maybe like for like 2-3 months, I would, I'd be on Instagram. I'm talking about like 2-3 years ago now. Like, hey, I want to grow, or like I want to grow an audience, and then like you would post something and then like it's crickets. You'd post something, nobody sees it, and then it's funnier too when it's like a photo that you absolutely love and you're like, this is awesome. I haven't seen photos like this before, and still same thing. So how to like, because this relates to your question, like what would differentiate me from, or like any artist, is I think that you have to start by staying authentic. So at the very beginning, it's just staying authentic, so you're not creating something to share or creating something that's influenced by what you're seeing other people create, because then you're not adding. You're not adding to or something substantial. You're kind of just,
you're becoming one of the herd. In a way.
Yeah. So I think that that's kind of the foundational thing, where just because, like, let's say any type of artist, I'm talking about like painters or dancers or whatever art form you want to discuss, like you could do something like authentic and be really good at it for like 6 years, 7 years, 8 years, 10 years, and still go unnoticed. So it's like that's the difficulty of that, I feel, like, of the creative industry, and something that's completely different from my medical field. It was never part of it. So it's been something very new for me to develop that.
Gotcha. And I love that. I think what you spoke to there is something me and Chandler have talked about a little bit, and that's really creating art for yourself.
Right.
And not feeling the pressure, especially with social media, because social media is a bad culprit with this.
Yeah.
Like, you should make stuff that you're proud of and share that stuff.
Yes, absolutely.
And not just go out and get the photo that everyone else has gotten.
Right.
Be like, oh, I've done this now. And it's great to do that stuff.
Of course.
There's cool places to see. You should do all of it.
Absolutely.
But like, you should never give in to the pressures and only do one thing or whatever because, you feel like you have to.
Right.
You should always be doing something you want to. And I think there's so much more value in that too.
Oh, yeah.
Let's transition into something that I really am excited to talk to you about.
Sure.
Because while you do a great job with photography and all that stuff, another thing that you like to do a lot is share, I guess, what I would call some wisdom on social media.
Yeah.
So you'll do a lot of tweets, or you'll share other people's things on Instagram, but I want to dive into this a little bit because you and I kind of share a little bit of this same passion for this. Where does like your inspiration and motivation come to do that on social media?
Sure. Yeah. So good question. So it kind of goes back to when I first started doing that in the first place. Is actually when I picked up a book. So many years ago, I would actually kind of just go into my parents' bookshelf and pick up random books because they had fantastic ones there. And most of those were written like they were like biographies or like as we were discussing before, just like life stories, real life practice. And that was like my first experience reading, like something outside of school. So, I did that for years. And it kind of, I realized like the inspiration that you can take or, develop further from people that, have lived or done things that you're hoping to do one day rather, right? So certainly I was inspired by that. I learned a lot from that. And then along the way, basically it developed from just what I read or like a book. It just TV shows, movies, listening to friends from conversations. I realized that there are I should preface this by saying there are a lot of like sayings and things that like a lot of people say, but they don't actually like live that way. And there's tons of those that we could talk about. But in my case, those things inspire me first, if that makes sense. So because it inspires me, a couple of years ago, I finally felt comfortable sharing that with others, if that makes sense. So for years, these things have been inspiring me personally. But I thought, hey, like I wish that a few years ago, it would have been helpful if one of my friends or there was someone that I knew that could tell me these things. So that's why I share them in hopes simply to inspire other people the same way it inspires me. And that's where it comes from, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because like I share a lot of that same kind of journey, maybe. And especially I share the same passion for reading.
Yeah.
I will admit I haven't been great this year.
Yes.
With everything going on. But I understand that we have a shared favorite book.
Absolutely, yeah.
And that is The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho.
Yes.
What is it about that book that you enjoy the most?
Yeah, that's a good question. And that is probably the first book, like novel type book that I read besides those other ones I was talking about, outside of whatever was required of me in school. That book, what really stayed with me was how it made me feel. I remember reading it for the first time. I remember reading about the journey that he was constantly like striving or looking for something. And then eventually, along the way that he picked up wisdom or, interacted with other travelers, if you will, who imparted wisdom on him. But a lot of it, like, for example, like we were discussing, like personal legend or like it is written, maktub is the word that they use in the book, is like hard to explain, just the feeling that it made me feel. Certainly inspirational, but more about that courage to kind of just press onward and take risks in life. I think that's what what stayed with me from that book was the courage that he had and the risk that he took.
Yeah, it's kind of like the courage to write your own life.
Yeah.
Like to not let other people dictate
Right.
it and to do what it is that, you aspire
Right.
to achieve.
Right.
And that's what that whole book was. The whole idea of personal legend. It's like you have a story that you can uncover for your own life.
Right.
But you're the one that gets to write it.
Absolutely.
If you so choose. You can
Right.
let other people do it for you, but that you always have that power inside of you.
Absolutely.
To change things up.
Yeah.
You can start out in New York, get into some kind of nursing career that takes you around the country and then be like, yo, I'm done with this.
Right.
But like that's the cool part about when you find a book like that moves you, like those lessons, they just stick inside of you.
Stays with you.
Like, and I mean, it's incredible to see, and it could be any kind of book.
Oh, yeah.
You mentioned biographies too. I've read a ton of biographies as well, and like some of those people, like one of my favorite characters in history is Ulysses S. Grant. So much that I named my truck after him. And it's like you find examples in literature, in history, whatever we're looking at here. And
Definitely.
Like they just move you in a way that's hard to explain.
Yes.
Like you said.
It is.
And it's a really cool feeling when you're going through that.
Yeah.
What I want to ask you, what of all the biographies that you've read or people that you've kind of, I guess, done research on or whatever, what is one of your favorite characters or who is someone that you have connected with the most?
And you're just talking in terms of like books I've read.
Sure, yeah.
Sure, okay. I would say actually it wasn't very recent. I remember it being was actually around the time I was studying for my board exam. So I'm talking about a number of years ago now. But I was actually I read the biography of Steve Jobs.
Okay, yeah.
So I gained a lot of it. So I was basically reading that book along with studying for the exam I had to take, I gained a lot of insight from that book. Something that was interesting to me was the kind of the background with him and Steve Wozniak, for example, like their dynamics with one another. And the reason that was so interesting is like he was kind of like the one who inspired the team around them to build these products out those years ago, versus being the one who always had the best ideas or like the technical knowledge behind it. And the reason why that was so striking to me was that, and actually Chandler brought this up before, was like a lot of the things that people do in life, you cannot do without a solid team around you. It's just not possible. And I think that was something that really struck me, because I was like, if you want to create an impact, and that's what he talked about, his dent in the universe, if you want to create impact, you cannot do it alone, period. You cannot. Happiness and success, I feel, are two concepts that people often kind of put together, and I think it's a bad idea. And the reason I think it's a bad idea is I've been happy for years, and this will make sense in a moment, but I've been happy for years. But because my definition of success is it doesn't even factor in happiness. It's completely unrelated in my world. So, but I haven't been successful. Okay, so I've always been happy, but I haven't been successful. So the reason I'm trying to separate those two is because when I realized that if I want to be successful or create an impact, there is no way that I'm going to be able to do it alone. You need to surround yourself with other people like you, like Chandler, other people as a team to build something that's bigger than you. So.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it speaks to what the whole idea of leadership is like.
Right.
Obviously, Steve Jobs was a great leader of the company, and a big reason why Apple is as big as it is today.
Right.
But it takes people like that are going to really make an impact on the world and other people individually as well. To some degree, what you do on social media when you're sharing all those other thoughts, that's a really good start.
Right.
And especially for a lot of people, like they just need to hear some of those things.
Yes.
Yeah. What I like to do here, real quick, is go through at least a couple of your tweets. Yeah. And what I'd like to hear from you is maybe background of where that tweet came from.
Sure.
And maybe expand upon it a little bit if you can.
Sounds good.
Okay. So here's one. It is, you wrote, "It is often the very activities that you know are healthy for you that you're avoiding that are the only activities that will propel you into your next evolution. Things that make you feel good won't necessarily help you evolve. It's often what you're avoiding doing that will."
Yeah. So again, all of these things are always me first. So like it inspired me first, or like it applies to me, and I hope that it helps someone. That's the whole point that I put it out there. But in this case, I remember I was talking about in terms of myself, just often the things that we procrastinate on, or the things that we want to put off because of whatever reason, like we get uncomfortable or we're scared. Often it's something that is really outside our comfort zone. Those are the things that are going to allow us to get into a space that we're actually wanting to be. So you could either push through and kind of face that fear and press on, or you can just do what makes you feel good, and you can stay where you are and you can keep dreaming about ending up somewhere better, but it's not going to happen. And this kind of applies to kind of more profound things in life, but also just something as simple as like weightlifting, which we've been discussing actually. Yeah. So I know it's not very apparent, but this is probably the most consistent I've been exercising in like 5-6 years, so it's a big deal for me. I've consistently, I think for 7 weeks now, actually, I've been lifting every week. So it relates to that because, for example, like if you neglect a certain body group or muscle group, and you're talking about like 4 or 5 years from now, like let's say you only do like bicep curls, let's say, right, for like 5 years. 5 years from now,
big biceps.
There's going to be some proportional issues, right? Like you're going to have chicken legs or whatever. But like it applies to that in terms of often it's because people don't like to do those exercises or whatever. It's just an example. So that's what that was about. You know, just trying to keep myself accountable and stay on track. So
yeah, I love that. And it's like you have to have like the discipline to look where you don't want to.
Yes.
Because that's where you're going to find the answers. Whether it's building a business, working out, like we said, like it applies to everything.
Yeah.
And if you're really looking to grow in any kind of way, you have to be willing to try some new things.
Absolutely.
And I think a lot of people, and maybe you can speak to this a little bit, I think a lot of people seek comfort these days. But comfort is not going to help you grow. No. You have to be willing to push yourself to new limits and new bounds if you wanted to see something new.
Absolutely. And just going along with that, if you are comfortable and content and you don't want to, that's okay too.
Yeah. Well, and it's okay to be comfortable and be happy for it. Like I can do a brief example. Like when I first moved here, I was and got into photography, was starting to see a lot of these places. I was very happy because it was like the first time that I was ever in this kind of, I'll say state, but I don't mean Utah. I mean like state of mind or something, where like I just felt really good, and I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna enjoy this for a bit. And then this year started. I was like, okay, we got to do something. We got to make some moves, and that's what we've been doing. Right. So it's okay to feel some of that.
Exactly.
But you got to get out of it at some point.
Right. And that again perfectly relates to, because for example, as you guys were both discussing earlier before we started, that you had been thinking about doing certain things, but it just wasn't the right timing, whatever. And that's okay. But you can't then sit and say, oh, like we're not growing or like it's not happening, because you just weren't ready at the time. But then you started doing it, and like you're doing the podcast and all these photography, meetups that you guys have been doing, and it's incredible to see, and I love to be a part of it. So
yeah. Like it makes me think of this idea that's like dreams are great to have, but they have to be accompanied by action.
Absolutely.
You can't just sit around. Like you have to start making something happen for your life if you want to see something new. So you want to see things change. You can't just sit back.
Right. 100%.
Let's go to a second one here. You wrote, if you're unprepared when the inevitable occurs, isn't that on you? It was inevitable after all.
That's an interesting one you chose, because it's probably a little bit, for some people, it might be a little darker than you might be expecting. I'm not sure. But that was actually, so as I mentioned, that I'm often in my head, that's just my personality, constantly thinking about things and how I can make sure I'm doing the right things and improve and all whatever's going on. So that was actually in regards to mortality, actually.
Oh, I love it.
So a little of that is related to my job, of course.
Sure.
But certainly I've seen a lot of mortality at work. I'm trying to think in the, pretty much my entire career has been in critical care in the ICU. So I've been taking care of the sickest of the sickest. Often they were not even able to talk to me, it was often just the family members. So this was actually just in terms of, I don't remember if I was watching something or some article about someone's passing, but it just kind of made me think of, like the grief process, that when someone passes away, especially when there's someone close to you, that it's something inevitable. It's going to happen, all of us. But then isn't it surprising that we're not ready for it when it comes? So that's where that was kind of, it's like a short sentence, but there's like a lot in it. So
oh no, I seriously love it, and like I'm so happy where you went with that. Yeah. Because when I brought that up, this is the reason I picked it. Yeah. Like I had an idea of what that meant to me, and it's exactly what you were talking about.
Interesting.
So what I love about it is that it's a very like stoic.
Right.
Saying.
Yes.
I don't know. Have you read any of the Stoics before?
Yes.
Yeah. It's a very stoic saying. And I was just reading in Seneca's letters the other day, like literally like 2 days ago. Wow. One of his letters about death, and it's exactly what you just said. Yeah. If you can spend time thinking about something in advance, you take the power of, say, at least like these negative emotions and stuff away from that when that moment comes. Yeah. And so like with death, like we're all going to experience it.
Of course.
And so in a way, it is our duty to figure out how to die well.
Right.
And we have to ponder that a little bit. Yeah. We can't just put it off and then the day comes, it's like, oh, well, this is scary. Yeah. But so I love where you went with that, because I was like, this is exactly what I was hoping for.
And that was what it was related about. And a lot of those things that you just mentioned, that it's just, one of those things that we all know is true or is going to happen, but we often just put that off. And naturally, a lot of people are not. See, I've worked in healthcare, not just in healthcare, but with patients that often pass on us, so it's become part of my career. So like, that stuff kind of trickles into your personal life, but like for the general people, like it's very normal not to want to discuss those things or feel comfortable around it. So,
yeah. Or even just like, I'll use the example of say losing your job, and not that it's inevitable you're going to lose your job, but something like that can easily be taken from you one day.
Absolutely.
And so
I'm
it's
glad
like
you've said that.
Like you should have a little bit of forethought and foresight to actually think about what might happen to you, or what you might be able to do in case that event happens. It's an important thing to keep in mind.
Yeah.
So I love that one. Yeah. I read them like, oh, that's a good one. Here's another one. We'll make this from the last one.
Sure.
It needs to be bigger than you. Only then will you find purpose, something real, something eternal, something worth fighting for. Tell me about that one.
That's a good one. And again, it's very important to me as it's my pinned tweet. So it's something that I kind of keep, like, so whenever I log into my profile, that's what I see too. And that is really, it does to me personally right now, that kind of relates directly to what I'm working on with Brent for Helminor. And the reason for that is because, for example, I enjoy, and I've done a few of them so far, like shooting like elopement weddings. It's very meaningful because this is literally the most important moment that a couple shares or whatever, in their life. And it's like very precious to be included in that, be invited to be in that. But there's a limit to what, like you can do on your own, if you will. And it's also a limit to what your personal, like, I would say discipline, like your personal discipline will compel you to, like, like a limit to how far you're going to be willing to go. Versus, like when you're part of a bigger team or a bigger purpose, you're going to be willing, it's going to be easier to do things that you normally would not have felt like yourself capable of. So, yeah,
I love it. And, to some degree, not to toot our own horn, but that's kind of one of the guiding ethoses of Bushwhackers.
Absolutely.
And what we're doing.
Yeah.
We love to meet new people and try and find a way to collaborate with them if we can. It's the whole point of this podcast is to find people like you who are a good part of our community that we love to be with. Yeah. But it's not about our podcast. It's about trying to get your name out there.
Right.
And working together with people like that makes bigger things happen than you could ever imagine.
Yeah.
And it's important that you do that.
Yeah.
Well, I think that was a really good way to get us here to the end of the episode. But I have one more question for you.
All right.
Okay. With all of this inspirational, motivational stuff in mind right now, I want you to think about everything you've been through, all the wisdom that's up inside your noggin. What is something that you think a lot of people need to hear in order to help them better their life in some way?
Wow. So that's a very loaded question, and it can go many ways. I think that what comes to mind the quickest, and often I feel that that's the right answer to go with, I think would be to surround yourself, or at least allow people to mentor you who are where you want to be in life. Pretty simple, like exactly what it sounds like is like, if you want to end up somewhere or have something or live a certain way, the most logical way to end up there is to follow in the footsteps of those who have done those things. So that's kind of and fortunately in my case, that was kind of, besides like the photography aspect of it, just the lifestyle and life stuff. Fortunately, because of my family, the way I grew up, I was given that by default. And I feel so lucky for that, that I was able to just kind of have that childhood and early adulthood and learn those things just from my family and not have to go elsewhere. But if you're talking about like an industry like photography or any industry, if you want to be an architect, whatever it may be, is you need to surround yourself with people who have done the things that you want to do. So
that's great, Nimit. Well, we really appreciate you coming on the show with us. I think we should come on here again and do a full episode of just these philosophical things. That'd be a lot of fun. But before we leave, can you tell people where they can find you?
Oh, yeah, sure. So probably the easiest place is on Instagram. My handle is not Dr. Patel. We talked about why a little bit of why that is, because I often was mistaken for Dr. Patel at work. That's where that came from. So yeah, mostly posting photos on Instagram there, and then my website is www.nimitpatel.com.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And you have Twitter. Don't forget that.
That's private.
Oh, it's private. Okay, he doesn't want you to follow there, but definitely follow him on Instagram. He's got great photos and obviously some great inspirational stuff as well. Nimit, thank you so much for coming on the show. If you're listening at home, especially audio only, we do have the video podcast here on YouTube. You can find us at Bushwhackers. We also are on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, and Amazon Music now. So we're expanding.
That is
phenomenal. Doing some big things. But we also have our website at realbushwhackers.com. You can go on there. You can find a cool hat like Nimit's got on right now. Oh, yeah, so we got some good things. Nimit, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me, man.
Absolutely. We're going to cheers the pink juice. Send us out here.
Yes.